brought to you by Knights of Awakening. This is the Labyrinth, and I am your host of probably Redbeard the Pirate is what you're thinking right now, but this is not a pirate eye patch. This is actually on the topic of channeling God forces. No, I'm not going to channel a God force right now, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what that means, and I wanted to get in the right mind frame for it, which is the first thing this does. Now, this is an eye patch made for me by my wife. She's gotten into leatherworking a little bit, and it was something that I said, I'll tell you what, let me get you all the tools for it, but first thing I want you to make, after you get a little bit good at it, or where you can do a little bit with some of the scraps we got, is an eye patch for me for my own work when I need to channel the Odinic God Force, or the Odin God Force. Now, a lot of you are probably there going, what do you mean channeling God forces? Well, it's kind of like taking on an aspect of that God, taking on a bit of their essence, taking on a bit of who they are. And high priests used to do this all the time. High priests used to get into garbs and garments and use tools that were connected to their gods, to their greater force, or to other powers. Maybe they were powers of nature, or maybe they were other forces. But ultimately, they would work on connecting to those powers, to those forces, and they would do so through costume, through ritual, through imitation, sometimes even going so far as to channel the power and the knowledge of that god themselves. A lot of old good pagan rituals are about channeling God forces and working with those energies. A lot of the practices that people kind of frown upon in the modern day that have more to do with fertility rites and things like that from the older periods were done that way. And a lot of your modern magic is really just Christian washed idealism on top of a template. The New Agers have kind of got it better in a sense because they borrow from the East so heavily, but your classic pagan magic was not so tame. It was raw, it was brutal, it was savage. It was like having an eye ripped out for knowledge. And in that type of magic was more in line with sympathetic magic, pulling things in from association. So with that, like I said, this kind of works very well as an example of part of that. Now, I have other things that I use if I want to channel the God Force of Odin. And a lot of people would say, well, what are those things and why do you use them? So I'm using Odin as a good example because there's a lot of accoutrements that are fairly easy for me to come by at this point. I use my wife's cloak, for example, the dress of a woman. Odin was known for running around in the dress of a woman. So I use her cloak from time to time when I really need to make use of the Odinic force. I use an eye patch, which this new one is way superior to the head wrap that we were using before for this. I often take, and for anyone who's never worn an eye patch like this is a very interesting experience because it cuts off half of your senses and it makes you really aware of how much data you have coming in through the other eye. It makes it hard to think clearly, but it also makes it easy to go into trance because you are limiting a sense. You tend, when you wear something like this, you tend to flex the muscles, and I don't know if that's visible on camera, but I know it's definitely affecting how I think during this. And maybe that's a part of it. Maybe the costume, the uncomfortableness, all of those things, they help you become something else. Your mundane day, you're not doing magic all of the time. You're not channeling these forces all of the time. There's got to be a separation between here and there, and the here and now, and the power of magic and the power of the forces that you're working with. that separation through use of costume, through use of connection with these kind of props can be very powerful, because you're no longer making magic mundane. You're no longer writing it off as this thing you kind of do, but you're making it something very special. And it definitely enhances the calling down of God forces in that, because in making it special, those God forces recognize you as taking this seriously. So there's definitely an irony in wearing an eye patch and looking a little silly, perhaps, to be taken seriously by Odin when you want to take on properties of Odin. So when would I use something like this? For disguise, for certain, for knowledge and understanding, for seeking wisdom, for battle, for war, and all of the other things that Odin is known for. So those are examples of why I would take this on. But why would I do this rather than using only my own power? Well, the very simple answer is I'm only good at certain things. And while I may be good at a lot of the things Odin is good at, a lot of the things that Thor is good at, they are definitely experts in fields where I am but a novice. So taking on that power and using props and using that sympathetic principle of magic to do that amplifies my ability. Again, it's not the same as direct channeling. It's not like Odin is going to come through me completely. That can happen. I've had it happen before. I am not going to make pains to do that on a video, not because I don't think it's worth doing, but because I think anything like that is so easy to pick apart and make fun at. And it takes away some of the credence of the art when you put it up on a media like this and people do poke fun at it. They do tear into it. Because in any channeling, anything coming through you is going to have limited to what you got up here. In the same way that you can only bridge that connection as well as you understand a deity, as well as you can grasp an idea of what it is you're making contact with. So doing live channelings, it never presents the art for the value that it is, because the value in something like this is going above and beyond what you are. Ooh, I think we're losing my eye patch here. Huh? Yeah, a little. That's okay. I can reattach it. There we go. But it loses some of the value in it when it works like that, when it's done like that. And I don't want to devalue this art form in any way. So I won't do live channelings on YouTube or on Facebook at any point. But I do channel God forces whenever I have the need, whenever it's useful to me or when it's useful to something I'm trying to accomplish. With this, it's a matter of getting into that mind frame as well. It's a matter of helping you adjust how you see yourself. It's very hard to channel a God force as a lesser person, as who you are in your day-to-day life, especially if you're starting out and this is something that you want to make one of the core practices of what you do. It's very hard to do this if you don't have complete focus, and this kind of thing helps build up that complete focus. It's really kind of interesting, especially since I got to keep readjusting this. Yeah, that's the downside of using something like this, is that sometimes the prop doesn't hold up as well as you'd hope. And in ritual, this would be very distracting. But something else in this, okay? I don't know how many people have used an eye patch like this, but after a while, a pattern starts to form on that other area. Your mind tries to fill in what's not there, and you see almost a static electric, a lightning in the other eye. You start to get an idea of why the god Odin was so harsh and so friendly and so chaotic in so many ways in the myths. So you get a little bit closer to your god when you do things like this. And not everyone can do something like this. You know, I remember someone who, part of their ritual work in priesthood, had asked me what they could do to become a better priest of Odin, and I recommended that they wear a wrap across their eye or something like an eye patch for a month across one eye during the daylight hours. They could take it off to shower and to go to bed. And I think they made it a week. So this is not an easy thing to do. It's something that even for this video, I've had to adapt quite a bit of who I am, what I'm doing, and how my mannerisms are. When I started this out, my jaw actually started hurting a little bit from my muscles in my cheek trying to correct for the fact that there was no input coming from that eye, that it felt like I had lost the eye. My body wanted to compensate for that. So I gained an even greater connection, understanding how Odin operates, what he really gave up for knowledge, and it gives me an appreciation for knowledge. And so that's another thing. In channeling God forces, you gain an appreciation for that. So that's the props of it, okay? And I think for the rest of the video, I will take this off for the rest of it. And I'd rather take it off of my own accord than have it fall off. And this is a quick mock-up. Wow, that is bright. Like this eye now, it feels like everything is so much lighter in it. So with that, that gave me a better appreciation for the use of those things in rituals, but it goes beyond just using props. It goes beyond just using tools. You can channel God forces at any point by assuming the mentality, kind of half imitation, half channeling of that God, and making that connection. And the more familiar you are with the God, the better this is going to work. Don't do this with gods you're not familiar with, because you're taking on a part of that vast flow that is this greater power. If you're not familiar with them, the best you're going to get out of that is hurt. But if you are, you can call upon that power at any point. And it's one more way of doing magic, calling upon that power and then directing it into a ritual, directing it into an intent and a seal, directing it into a phrase or a poem. And a lot of times that God force will guide you in your actions, helping you to do a better ritual, to make a better seal, or taking you one more step in a different direction than you would have went in. Not going to be a long video here. I did this live on Facebook. It'll probably pop up some other places that, were well known and loved. I want to thank you for your time. As always, I'm here to help people with this stuff, but I don't always have a lot of free time. So the best way to get a hold of me is to send an email to knightsofawakening@gmail.com with your questions. If you want an episode done on something, those questions going there will allow me to then create an episode around this, and that might be useful to you in answering that question. If you write an email to knightsofawakening@gmail.com, what will happen is that Justin will channel through the power of his internet connection the human force known as Charles to get him to do an episode on topics that you have a great interest in. I personally love working with God forces and channeling them, but I work with a very specific subset of the Norse God forces, primarily Thor and Odin. I've worked with Frey and Frigg a couple times with that, and I've worked with Tyr a few times when justice was very necessary, but primarily Thor and Odin. And really for channeling God forces anymore, more Odin than Thor. I'm too much like Thor. Hitting things hard is something I'm good at. Getting angry, I am good at. Seeking wisdom, being more knowledgeable, being more tactical, these are things that this is more useful to me to channel the forces of Odin into myself. It's a powerful technique. Again, if you are not ready, if you do not work with gods and goddesses regularly and you already aren't familiar with them, you're not making offerings to them every day, you're not in a position to call on them, probably not a good idea to channel them. The worst that could happen is you'd have a total backlash. They are insulted and cause you harm. The best that could happen, if you're not at that point where you can make that connection yet, is that you kind of get messed up mentally for a little bit from it, that it's hard for you to deal with it. Another thing in this, you want to focus on your sense of self in this. You want to do self-awareness meditations a lot before you do this kind of thing. You don't want to be channeling these powers through you and not know where you end and they begin. You want to be able to take the eye patch off. Because if you can't, you will fall out of focus. You will lose some of yourself to them. Beyond that, you want to make sure that you have that familiarity with them on an energetic level, which means meditating on that God. It means journey work to that realm, to connect to that God, to speak with them directly. If you're not doing journey work to those realms, channeling God forces, it's a no-go. It's more dangerous than it is useful. So that's it for the live video. I think that covers everything I wanted to cover on this. It was really great. I think that this will be a great opportunity for people to learn a new technique or try some new things within a technique they may have used or thought about, and maybe up your magical game just a little bit. You know, that's kind of like what I want to do with these videos. I want to make the practitioners better. I want to raise that bar a little. And if something like this helps you raise that bar, if it gives you something to think about and focus on and use that you would not have normally used or focused on, that's fantastic. And if it doesn't, then hey, you know, email us, let us know. But whatever you do, awaken the night within.